We're going to play a child's game. And I know you're going to remember it. You were a child once, weren't you, buddy? Okay. Now, congregation, you sing along when you recognize it. You put your right hand in, you put your right hand out, you put your right hand in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey, and you turn yourself around, and that's what it's all about. You put your left hand in, you put your left hand out, you put your left hand in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey, and you turn yourself about. That's what it's all about. Good. Now, you know how that song ends? You remember? Okay, we're going to sing that. You put your whole self in, you put your whole self out, you put your whole self in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey, and you turn yourself around. That's what you all about. Amen. Thank you. Okay. I appreciate that. Now, that would be a perfect story for baptism, except for one thing. After baptism, you don't pull yourself out again, right? You put your whole self in, and you stay there. There's a story about a hen and a pig, and they were making a journey, and after time, they got a little hungry, as you can imagine, and they start looking for a restaurant, and they come upon this breakfast diner. And on the sign out front, it says ham and eggs. The hen says, I think I want to go in here. And the pig says, no. All that requires of you is a donation. That requires of me a total commitment. You put your whole self in, you pull your whole self out. Total commitment. It's not true for baptism that you can pull yourself back out. Symbolically, baptism implies a complete surrender of self. It means that you're no longer living for yourself. That something else is driving you. Something else is more important in our lives together. You know, we're no longer seeking power. We're no longer seeking control. We're no longer seeking notoriety. We're seeking the very presence of God in our lives. We cannot have both worlds. We cannot have the world and the kingdom of God. Jesus warned of that. He said, no one can serve two masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth, he said. And that writer, John, in his Revelation, we read at the end of our Bible, quotes Jesus as saying, in the last days, I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Oh, I wish that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I'm rich, I've prospered, I need nothing. You don't realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. God doesn't want us to test the baptismal waters with a toe and keep our other toe dry. There is no test. God wants all of us. Toe-in Christianity, however, is firmly in place today in our postmodern world. We call it secular Christianity. You know, secular Christianity is strange because, you know, we can do all the things. We can come to church on Sunday. We can put a little money in the offering plate. We might even come to this meeting or go to that gathering. But it has no real significance in our lives. It has no power over our control or our character. It has no meaning in our morality or our ethics. Sound about right? I wonder, where is our commitment? I wonder, where is our loyalty? Where is our dedication? Where is that transformational struggle to change us into the very image of Christ? I remember a few years ago, a rather astute businessman came to my study during a capital campaign drive, and we were raising $9 million for renovations in a new building. And the fellow sat down in front of me and said he gave to the church, but he didn't tithe because he didn't want the church to depend on him financially, because something terrible might happen to him in his life. And I said, okay, how long are you getting your loans for in your business? He said, well, I get 30-year loans. Oh, really? Yeah, 30-year loans. What would happen if something terrible happened to you with that mortgage to the bank for 30 years? And he said, preacher, I think I got your point. How do I know if my faith is genuine? Well, I have to ask myself a few questions. Can the life of Christ be seen in me? Can the attitude of Christ be found in my attitude? Is the love of Christ found in my heart? Is the mercy and forgiveness and grace of Jesus Christ found in my heart and expressed in my life? Does the nature of my character, the nature of my personality, does it bring people together? Does it heal people of factions and frictions? Or does it divide people and insinuate anger? Remember the movie A Platoon? Remember that movie? Oliver Stone made it. It's not a very good movie, and it's kind of off kilt. But there's a Platoon is about the Vietnam War. And there was a character in that movie named Sergeant Barnes, and he says something that just resonated with me. He said, reality, there are the things that are, and there are the things that ought to be, and then there are the way things are. Yes, there is reality, and the truth is, secular Christianity has permeated not only the world, but it has snuck its way into the Christian church. All churches, not just ours, but all churches. One of my favorite theologians, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, was executed just days before Germany fell in World War II. And you have to appreciate Bonhoeffer, you have to remember that he was a professor in a seminary in Chicago. And he could have stayed there to a ripe old age and died. But he knew what was going on in Nazi Germany, and he went back to Nazi Germany to resist the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. And because of his resistance, he was executed just days before the liberation. But right before he died, he wrote these words: I fear that Christians who stand with only one leg upon the earth also stand with only one leg in heaven. Martin Luther King said, if a man has not discovered something for which he will die, he's not fit to live. What we're talking about is commitment. And today it seems commitment has, by and large, disappeared in our society, in our culture. You know, if you're committed today, somebody's going to say you need to be committed. They'll say things like, oh, you're closed-minded. Or, you know, you're not really thinking through this. Or you've kind of lost touch with reality. Or somehow you're less smart than other people. Some years ago, Arthur Geigerman wrote a simple little poem I think speaks loudly to our culture today. He wrote, first dentistry was painless, and bicycles were chainless, carriages were horseless, and laws had become enforceless. Next, cookery was fireless, telegraphy was wireless, cigars were nicotineless, and coffee became caffeineless. Soon oranges became seedless, the putting greens weedless, the college experience lessonless, the proper diet fatless, Then highways became dustless, steel rustless, tennis courts sodless, and the new religion godless. He wrote that in 1936. Yeah, we want painless, chainless, wireless, weedless, seedless, dustless, and restless lives. But are we better for it? Are we better for it spiritually? Hardly. And it's probably because of that less thing at the end of that poem. Godless. You see, the secular Christian can live her life or his life as though there were not a God. They can live their life as an atheist or as an agnostic. They live as though God does not know what they're doing at any given moment, as though God doesn't hear what they're saying, how they're acting. So, they're Christian on Sunday, but God help us on Monday. Life might get more comfortable with modern conveniences, but it never gets easy. Life might get simpler with computers and cell phones and all those trinkets of electronics, but life does not get simple. It gets harder and more complicated. But God never promised us easier or simple. God's focus, you see, is elsewhere. God focuses upon loyalty. God focuses upon commitment and dedication. Now, I'm reminded of that famous missionary David Livingstone, who went to Africa and spent the rest of his life there, and he had no modern conveniences there at all. And he would write letters back to Europe explaining the circumstances and situations he found himself in. And one missionary society wrote him back and said in a letter to him, "We have some people who would like to come and serve alongside you, Dr. Livingstone. Do you have some easy access roads to get where you are located?" And Dr. Livingstone wrote back, "If you have people who will come only if there are good roads, I don't want them and I can't use them. I want the kind of people who will come even if there were no roads at all." You see, Africa required commitment. So does our baptism. So does Jesus Christ. Now, I think we love commitment, don't we? We love commitment, but it's the commitment we see in other people. We admire the athlete at the Olympics, doing this, that, and the other, whirling around in the air, and we can't get over some of these guys on those snowboards. Gail and I are just fascinated with these people flipping and twisting in the air 5 stories up, And I asked Gail last night, I said, where did they practice that? How did you practice that? But we admire their dedication. We admire their loyalty to that sport. And I remember the ice skater, Fleming, a reporter asked her one day, or said to her one day, "My, you are such a natural athlete." And she says, "No, I'm not. Since I was 12 years old, I got up at 4 a.m. I was on the ice at 4:45. I skated until school time. And right after school, I was on ice again for 3 more hours before I did my homework. It's not in my DNA." Commitment, loyalty, dedication. And it's escaped us, hasn't it? Has that escaped us in our society today? I think it has. I read the other day where sociologists believe that in 10 years, 70% of all marriages will end in divorce. 70%. 20 years ago, it was 30%. And I read where millennials don't want to commit themselves to even purchasing a home. They would rather rent something so they can move quickly, so they can go somewhere else. And read about the clubs and organizations from sororities to fraternities. They're dying because nobody wants to join. They're okay wearing the shirt, but they don't want to wear the work. They'll throw $1 at it, but don't expect them to do anything. But you know what? What saddens me more than all that is we also see it in the Christian church. And the Christian church is dwindling all across the United States. We hear about this church and that church growing and thriving, but by and large, we're dwindling. Now, it's slower here in the Southeast because we're where? Bible Belt. That's right. We always do it last, right? It's slower here, but it's happening everywhere else. It happened in Europe, and it spread here. And now there are some churches that are growing and thriving, and they're doing it the right way. But I've noticed some churches that are growing and thriving that are not doing it the right way because they don't put any sense of loyalty or commitment or dedication on their members. In fact, some of them have even taken that cross out of their worship center. The greatest symbol of the Christian faith, they have removed it from the worship center. Why? Because they don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. You want to know why Islam is gaining 10 converts for every one convert to Christianity? Commitment. They're dedicated. They're out there spreading their word. They're inviting people to mosque. Yeah. And a Muslim theologian looking out over the Christian landscape, and he wasn't saying this in a mean way, wrote these words. Christianity is a corpse lying upon the ash heap of human history. Islam is going to bury it. Why? We just answered this a second ago. Why? Commitment. Jesus stood before John that day long ago in those murky waters of the Jordan River, and he submitted himself to baptism. And if there was anyone on the planet that did not need baptism, forgiveness of sins, it was Jesus of Nazareth. So why did he do it? Well, I think he is showing us the way. And baptism marks the way of God. Baptism says, this is where I am going now. I am going away from myself, and I'm going towards the holy. I am not master of my life any longer. The holy in my life masters my life. Episcopal priest Doug Bailey tells about going to Atlanta to officiate a baptism of his grandson. And at that parish where the baptism was occurring, they had a custom. And wherever the child was baptized, they took a banner to the house and they put it up over the front door. And the banner read, Christ, apostrophe S, Christ's own, O-W-N, forever. Christ's own forever. And it would stay there through the afternoon till the party broke up. Well, it was over his daughter's house, and a telephone call came in late that afternoon, and on the other end was a friend that asked this question. I am so sorry, I am so embarrassed, I just want to ask, did your child die? And the mother of the baptized child said, well, in a sense, yes. The child has died to self and is going to be raised for God. Well, Martin Luther found himself ready to give up sometimes whenever worry for his own life and the life of the church he loved kind of overwhelmed him. And he said that what got him through the angst, the depression, and Martin Luther was a depressed person. What got him through the depression was when he would think about things and he got sad and he got upset and he got that sense of dread, that he would take his finger and put it on his forehead. And he said, remember, Martin, you are a baptized child of God. You know, baptism's a sacrament. It's a sign we no longer belong to ourselves. We actually belong to God. It's a statement about our ultimate allegiance, our alliance. And the reason we present ourselves and our children for baptism is that we're making a statement. Now, I know we've turned it into this sentimentality, a ritual today. But baptism is more than sentimentality. It's more than just ritual. You're making a statement about how you're going to raise that child, or you're making a statement how you're going to raise yourself in transformation to be like Jesus Christ. Robert Brown tells of a time in 1960 when he participated in a Lutheran worship service in East Berlin. Now, if you remember in 1960, East Berlin was communist, and the Christian church was frowned upon greatly. And what was interesting is the government or the secular world in East Berlin had come up with alternatives to all the things done in the Christian church. For instance, they had the secular marriages, they had the secular funerals, and they had a secular type baptismal service. But this young couple came into that worship service that day to have their child baptized. Now, what that meant was their names were going to be put on the communist list as suspects. They were going to be suspicious. They could lose their jobs because of having their child baptized. It might even mean that the future in the secular world, their child may have a rougher time climbing the ladder of success because it's a baptized Christian. But guess what? They stood there and had their child baptized that morning. And Brown says, the couple really doesn't have to answer my question. Their very act of bringing their baby to the church is a public statement about their priorities. They engage in significant risks because of their faith, and in the face of their quiet public courage, I feel unworthy. And so do I. There's a cartoon in Leadership Journal I read some time back that had a subtle little message. It showed a church secretary buzzing the pastor in the next room, and she announces to the pastor, "It's Monty Williams on the phone. He wants to know if he can come and audit your discipleship class on total commitment." Of course, the joke is that a lot of people would like to just audit the course on total commitment rather than doing the real thing. But when we understand the significance of Christian baptism, we see the folly in all that. We see how ungenuine it actually is. There's a delightful story, I think, about a precious 3-year-old boy named Joy. And like most 3-year-old boys, he didn't enjoy baths all that much. And right before his nightly bath, his mother says, "Don't you want to be nice and clean?" This is after he hid under the bed. "Don't you want to be nice and clean?" Joy replied, "Yes, but tonight can you just dust me off?" I think, we would wish baptism was just a little dusting off rather than a washing away. Pastor Thomas Pinckney uses a beautiful analogy of the baptismal truth. He says that one summer his boys discovered large clay deposits in a swimming hole that they had dug out in the Green River. And the boys found that this clay created fantastic body paint. And, they could smear it all over their bodies and swim 5 minutes and it would still be there. So it was great stuff. And they noticed, he noticed the two boys covered with clay, and they had this gleam in their eyes, and they started whispering to each other, and they packed on even more clay. And then they hollered, "We love you, Mommy," and started running toward her. And she naturally ran in the opposite direction. Who wants to be hugged by two boys covered with yucky clay? But parents don't always run, do they, from dirty children, even though they maybe get covered with filth themselves. Imagine you hear the distressed cry of your child, and you look up, and your precious daughter has fallen face down in the mud, and she runs toward you, tears streaming down her eyes on her cheeks and washing some of the dirt away. And here she comes towards you, mud all over her, in her hairs, in her eyes, in her ears, on her clothes, in her fingernails, even in her mouth. Do you say to this broken little soul that's embarrassed, "Don't come near me"? What do? You don't say, "You made your mess, lie in it," do you? You say, "Come here." and you hug that child, and you bring that filthy child into your own being, and you soil yourself with that child's soil. And that's what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. That is what baptism symbolizes. Baptism doesn't make that possible for us. Baptism is the acknowledgement that that's what's happened in our life. We belong to God. Baptism is our response of faith. It shows our allegiance. It shows our loyalty. It acknowledges that we are seeking a life anew in the life of Christ. It means that we are on a path, of spiritual transformation. Now I'm going to close with this. There's a book, a collection of short stories that Robert Redford turned one of them into a movie. And he used the first short story in the book. And if you want to read that book, you can come in my study and sit down and read it in there. It's just a short little story. It's called A River Runs Through It. Do you remember that movie? Or have you read the book? Okay. It's a great book. And there's some lines in there that Trudeau would love to have read himself. But it's a story about a Presbyterian minister who loved to fly fish. And he did it very mechanically. And he was just mesmerized by fly fishing. And Norman MacLean, who wrote the story, who went on to be a professor and writer, talks about his dad's obsession with fly fishing. And he would take those boys every Sunday and Wednesday to fly fish. I love the description of Methodists that the dad gives in the story. You remember that one? Yeah, he describes Methodists as Baptists who can read. I love that. The mother is affable. She's all the time trying to help somebody, fix something, take care of everybody. And she wants them to take pictures of things she has not gotten to see for herself. And then there's Norman, who becomes the professor. He's more intellectual, academic, kind of dry personality. And then there's Paul, the younger son, who is anti-authority, kind of lawless, antinomianistic kind of sense to him, and nobody can control him. And Norman, at the end of that short story, the writer, is standing in the waters of the great Blackfoot River, and he's fly fishing like his dad before him. And he's remembering all these stories, and he's remembering the words of his father. And he says at one point, all those that I have loved and did not understand before have now gone away. And then he says this. Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. Of some rocks, they are timeless and covered in raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. Then he says, I am haunted by waters. The River Jordan runs through the very foundation of our spiritual lives. Those waters go back to the baptism of Jesus. In fact, when we undergo baptism, we are sharing in the baptism of Jesus. I pray that we will become haunted by those waters. And I ask that before you leave this room today, you might pause for a precious moment, touch your forehead, and say with Martin Luther, thanks be to God, I am a baptized child of Jesus Christ. Amen.